Queen Maya's enraged scream echoes through the Adoshan royal palace as she learns of Joseph Brown's arrival. The human ambassador, unaware of the storm he's walking into, stands before the ornate doors of the throne room. "Execute him immediately." Maya's voice booms from within. The Adoshan guards flanking Joseph exchange confused glances before roughly seizing his arms. "What's going on?" Joseph demands, struggling against their grip. The doors burst open, revealing the furious Queen Maya, her iridescent scales flashing dangerously in the ambient light. "You dare show your face here again, human?" she hisses, her tail lashing behind her. "After what you've done?" Joseph's mind races, trying to recall any diplomatic faux pas from his previous mission. "Your Majesty, I don't understand." "Silence," Maya cuts him off. "Your seed has taken root. I carry your half-breed child." The words hit Joseph like a physical blow. He gapes at the queen, noticing for the first time the slight swell of her abdomen. "But how? We only—" "Once," Maya finishes, her voice dripping with venom. "It should have been impossible. Do you know what this means for me? For my rule?" As if on cue, an Adoshan noble steps forward, his voice ringing out clearly. "By our ancient laws, any monarch who bears a half-breed child must abdicate the throne." The throne room erupts into chaos. Joseph's head spins as he processes the implications. Adoshan females typically require years of attempts to conceive. His success on the first try is unprecedented. Outside the palace, news of the crisis spreads like wildfire. The human embassy on the Adosian homeworld receives an urgent communication about Joseph's arrest and the shocking pregnancy. Earth's government convenes an emergency session of the Interstellar Relations Committee. "This could spark a war," one committee member warns as they debate the potential fallout. Meanwhile, a group of Adosian nobles gathers in secret, seeing opportunity in the chaos. "The human and his child could be the key to overthrowing Maya's regime," one whispers excitedly. As tensions escalate, Earth's military puts its space fleet on high alert. Warships power up their engines, preparing for a potential conflict with the Adoshans. Back in the palace, Joseph is thrown into a holding cell. He paces the small space, mind-reeling. How could a single night of passion lead to this? He needs to find a way out, to protect himself and his unborn child, and somehow prevent an interstellar war. In the royal medical wing, Queen Maya undergoes tests that confirm the unprecedented nature of her pregnancy. The Adoshan doctors marvel at the rapid progression, their findings soon leaking to the public. The Adoshan streets fill with protesters. Some view the pregnancy as a sign of human superiority, while others decry it as a threat to Adoshan purity. The planet teeters on the brink of civil unrest. As the first day of the crisis draws to a close, both humanity and the Adoshans find themselves facing a conflict that could reshape the galaxy. And at the center of it all, an unexpected pregnancy that defies the odds and threatens to change everything. As night fell on the Adoshan homeworld, Joseph Brown lay sleepless in his holding cell, the weight of the day's revelations pressing down on him. The cool metal floor beneath him did little to soothe his racing thoughts. He replayed the scene in the throne room over and over, each time feeling the shock of Maya's words anew. The first rays of dawn crept through the small window of his cell, casting long shadows across the floor. Joseph sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair, when he heard the sound of approaching footsteps. The cell door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a female Adoshan with scales that shimmered like opals in the dim light. She carried a small case in her clawed hands. "Ambassador Brown," she said, her voice carrying a hint of curiosity. "I am Dr. Zara, Chief Royal Physician. I need to conduct some tests on you." Joseph eyed her warily. "Tests? What kind of tests?" Dr. Zara's tail swished gently as she set her case down on the small table in the cell. "We need to understand how this pregnancy occurred. The fertility between humans and Adosians is unprecedented." Joseph hesitated, his mind working through the implications. This could be his chance to gather information, to understand what was happening. He nodded slowly. "All right, I'll cooperate." As Dr. Zara began her examination, taking blood samples and scanning Joseph with various devices, activity buzzed throughout the rest of the palace and beyond. In a dimly lit chamber, A group of Edosian nobles huddled around a holographic display. At their center stood Lord Zan, his scales a deep midnight blue that seemed to absorb the light around him. "The human ambassador could be the key to our plans," Zan said, his voice low and measured. "If we can reach him, make him our ally, we could use this crisis to our advantage." One of the other nobles, a female with emerald scales, leaned forward. "But how do we get to him? He's under heavy guard." Zan's lips curved into a smile. "I have a plan for that. We'll need to act quickly, though. Time is not on our side." Meanwhile, in the royal chambers, Queen Maya paced back and forth, her swollen abdomen a constant reminder of the crisis at hand. General Kroll, a tall, muscular Edosian with battle-scarred scales, stood at attention before her. "Your Majesty?" Kroll said, his voice gruff. "We must act decisively. The humans should be executed immediately. It's the only way to quell the unrest." Maya stopped her pacing, fixing Kroll with a piercing gaze. "And spark a war with Earth in the process? No, there must be another way." As the Queen and her general debated, a sleek Earth vessel entered Edosian space. On its bridge, Admiral Helena Reeves stood with her hands clasped behind her back, her resolute expression fixed on the display. "Edosian Defense Fleet hailing us, Admiral," her communications officer reported. Reeves nodded. "Open a channel. Let's hope diplomacy prevails today." Back in Joseph's cell, Dr. Zara's eyes widened as she examined the results of her tests. "This is remarkable," she murmured. Joseph sat up straighter. "What is it? What did you find?" Dr. Zara looked at him, a mix of awe and concern in her eyes. "The embryo? It's developing at an accelerated rate, and its genetic makeup, it shows enhanced traits from both species." Joseph's mind reeled at the implications. What does that mean for the child, for Maya? Before Dr. Zara could answer, shouts erupted from outside the cell. The door burst open, revealing a group of Edosians, led by a regal-looking male with midnight blue scales. "Ambassador Brown," the leader said urgently, "I am Lord Zan. We're here to help you, but we must move quickly." Joseph looked from Lord Zan to Dr. Zara, confusion and alarm warring on his face. "What's going on?" Dr. Zara hesitated for a moment before making a decision. She pressed a small device into Joseph's hand. "Use this to contact the human embassy. Tell them what you've learned." As alarms began to blare throughout the palace, Joseph found himself swept up in a whirlwind of action. Lord Zan and his supporters rushed him through hidden passages, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them. In the midst of the chaos, Joseph's mind raced. He had to find a way to prevent a war, protect his child, and navigate the complex political landscape he'd been thrust into. As they emerged into the cool night air of the Edosian capital, he realized that the next few hours would determine not just his fate, but the future of human-Edosian relations. The city sprawled before them, a sea of lights and towering structures. In the distance, the sounds of protest could be heard, a reminder of the turmoil gripping the planet. Lord Zan turned to Joseph, his eyes glinting in the starlight. "Ambassador, we're taking you to a secure location. From there, you'll have the chance to address the Edosian people. Are you ready to make history?" Joseph's heart raced as he followed Lord Zan and his supporters through the winding streets of the Edosian capital. The cool night air filled his lungs, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere of his cell. As they moved swiftly through the shadows, Joseph's mind struggled to process the rapid turn of events. "We're almost there, Ambassador," Lord Zan whispered, his midnight blue scales barely visible in the dim light. "Once we reach the broadcast location, you'll have your chance to address the people." Suddenly, a piercing alarm cut through the night, followed by the distant sound of shouting. Joseph's breath caught in his throat as he realized the palace must have discovered his escape. "We need to move faster," Captain Lyra urged, her shimmering blue scales catching the light as she ushered them forward. "The loyal guards will be searching for us." As they rounded a corner, Joseph nearly collided with a figure emerging from a side alley. He stumbled back, ready to run, when he recognized the familiar face of Dr. Zara. "Ambassador Brown," she said, her voice low and urgent. "I've been looking for you. We don't have much time." Lord Zan's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing here, Doctor?" Dr. Zara held up her hands in a placating gesture. I'm here to help. The Queen's pregnancy, it's progressing faster than anyone could have anticipated. We need to act quickly if we want to prevent a catastrophe. Joseph's mind reeled at this new information. How fast? At this rate, she could give birth within weeks, Dr. Zara explained, her voice tinged with a mix of scientific fascination and concern. The group exchanged worried glances, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Lord Zan nodded decisively. We'll need your expertise, Doctor. Come with us. As they resumed their journey, the sounds of unrest grew louder. Rounding another corner, they came face to face with a scene of chaos. A mob of protesters clashed with riot police, their angry shouts filling the air. This way, Captain Lyra hissed, guiding them down a narrow alley to avoid the conflict. Joseph's heart pounded as they navigated the tumultuous streets. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat, every distant shout a sign of impending capture. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, the fate of two species resting on his ability to reach the broadcast station and say the right words. Meanwhile, across the city at the Royal Spaceport, Admiral Helena Reeves stepped off her shuttle, her crisp uniform a stark contrast to the ornate Edosian architecture surrounding her. She was immediately met by a delegation of Edosian officials, led by a stern-looking male with deep green scales. Admiral Reeves, he said, his voice cold and formal, I am Foreign Minister Thax. Your presence here is unexpected. Helena's expression remained neutral as she replied, Minister Thax, the situation demands immediate attention. I request an audience with Queen Maya to discuss this diplomatic crisis. Thax's scales rippled with barely concealed agitation. The Queen is indisposed. Perhaps we can arrange a meeting with all due respect, Minister, Helena interrupted, her tone firm but polite. This matter cannot wait. The stability of our interspecies relations hangs in the balance. As they argued, Helena discreetly tapped a command into her wrist communicator, signaling the human fleet to move closer to Edosian space. It was a risky move, but one she hoped would apply the necessary pressure to force negotiations. Back in the palace, Queen Maya stood before a large window, her hand resting on her swollen abdomen. The rapid growth of the child within her had brought with it a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Anger still simmered beneath the surface, but it was increasingly tempered by a growing sense of curiosity and protectiveness. Your Majesty, General Kroll's gruff voice interrupted her thoughts. The human has escaped. We believe he had help from within the palace. Maya turned, her iridescent scales shimmering in the low light. Find him, General, but bring him to me unharmed. Kroll's eyes widened in surprise. But Your Majesty, surely the wisest course of action is to eliminate the threat. Are you questioning my orders, General? Maya's voice carried a dangerous edge. Kroll bowed his head. No, Your Majesty, it will be done as you command. As the general left to carry out her orders, Maya turned back to the window. Her hand moved in slow circles over her abdomen, feeling the strong movements of the child within. For the first time since this crisis began, she allowed herself to imagine a future where this child, her child, could be a bridge between two worlds instead of a catalyst for their destruction. In a hidden command center across the city, Lord Zan received an urgent communication. The human fleet is on the move, his aide reported. They're entering Edosian space. Zan's scales darkened with concern. We're running out of time. Contact Lyra. Tell her to get the ambassador to the broadcast station immediately. As dawn broke over the Edosian capital, Joseph and his unlikely allies finally arrived at their destination, a nondescript building housing a secret broadcast facility. They rushed inside, aware that every second counted. We're ready for you, Ambassador, Lord Zan said, gesturing towards a makeshift studio. The fate of our worlds rests on your words. Joseph took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. As he stepped in front of the camera, he knew that his next actions would shape the future of human-Edosian relations for generations to come. The red light blinked on, and he began to speak. Speak! But before he could utter a word, the door to the studio burst open. General Kroll strode in, flanked by a squad of heavily armed Edosian soldiers, their weapons trained on Joseph and his allies. "Surrender now!" Kroll growled, his scales rippling with anger. In the split second of chaos that followed, Joseph locked eyes with Lord Zan. A silent understanding passed between them. Joseph bolted for a side door, while Lord Zan and Captain Lyra engaged the soldiers, creating a distraction. "After him!" Kroll bellowed, but Joseph was already racing down a narrow corridor. Heart pounding, Joseph navigated the labyrinthine building, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind him. He burst out onto an unfamiliar street, the early morning light barely illuminating the alien architecture. With no idea where to go, Joseph ran. The Adoshan city stretched before him, a maze of towering structures and winding alleys. He ducked into a side street, trying to lose his pursuers. As he paused to catch his breath, a hand grabbed his arm. Joseph spun, ready to defend himself, but found himself face to face with an Adoshan wearing a hooded cloak. "This way, human," the stranger whispered. "We can help you." With no other choice, Joseph followed. The Adoshan led him through a series of hidden passages and concealed doorways, eventually emerging in a dimly lit underground chamber. "Welcome, Ambassador Brown," another Adoshan said, stepping forward. "We are the Harmony Coalition. We believe in peace between our species." As Joseph was briefed on the underground network of human sympathizers, events were unfolding rapidly across the city. At the Royal Spaceport, Admiral Helena Reeves stood her ground before Foreign Minister Thax. "Minister, I must insist on speaking with Queen Maya," Helena said, her voice firm. Thax's scales rippled with agitation. "Admiral, I've already told you—" He was interrupted by an aide who whispered urgently in his ear. Thax's eyes widened. "What is it?" Helena demanded. Thax hesitated, then spoke. "The Queen's pregnancy. It's progressing at an unprecedented rate. The fetus is showing signs of accelerated development." Helena's mind raced, grasping the implications. "Minister, this could be a scientific breakthrough of immense importance. We need to approach this collaboratively, not as adversaries." In the royal palace, Queen Maya paced her chambers, one hand resting on her swollen abdomen. The child within her moved with surprising strength, a constant reminder of the unique life she carried. Her thoughts turned to Joseph. Despite the circumstances of their encounter, she found herself longing to speak with him, to understand. Making a decision, she summoned her most trusted handmaiden. "Arrange a private meeting with Ambassador Brown. No one else is to know." Unbeknownst to Maya, a hidden camera captured her whispered instructions. Within hours, the footage had leaked, spreading across Adoshan communication networks and reigniting the public debate. Lord Zan, having escaped the confrontation at the broadcast station, seized upon this new development. He took to the streets, his voice ringing out over the growing crowd. "Fellow Adosians, the Queen herself seeks understanding with the humans. It is time for a new era of cooperation." The demonstration swelled, drawing in both Adosians and the few humans present on the planet. The security forces, overwhelmed by the sheer numbers, struggled to maintain control. In a secure laboratory, Dr. Zara worked feverishly, analyzing the latest data on the hybrid fetus. Her eyes widened as she made a startling discovery. "This is incredible," she murmured. The genetic structure of the fetus showed potential for curing a genetic disorder that had plagued Adoshans for generations. As she prepared to share her findings, alarms blared throughout the city. General Kroll's voice echoed from public announcement systems. "By order of the Military High Command, Queen Maya has been placed under protective custody. Martial law is now in effect. All human influences will be purged from our world." The pronouncement sent shockwaves through the city. Military vehicles rolled through the streets as Kroll's loyal forces moved to secure key locations. In the underground hideout, Joseph received the news with horror. The Harmony Coalition members debated their next move, but Joseph's thoughts were only of Maya. "I need to get to the palace," he said, cutting through the discussion. Captain Lyra, who had managed to find the hideout, stepped forward. "I'll help you, Ambassador, but you should know, Dr. Zara has made a discovery about your child. It could change everything." As Lyra briefed him on the potential cure, Joseph felt a mix of awe and trepidation. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like never before. Suddenly, the ground shook. The distant sound of explosions reached them. "The human fleet," someone gasped. "They're engaging Kroll's forces in orbit." Joseph knew he had to act fast. With Captain Lyra and a small group of coalition members, he prepared to infiltrate the palace. As they gathered equipment and reviewed plans, Joseph's mind raced. Somewhere in the palace, Maya was alone, possibly in labor. His child, their child, was about to be born into a world teetering on the brink of war, and somehow he had to find a way to bridge the gap between their species and prevent catastrophe. As they moved out into the chaos-filled streets of the Adoshan capital, Joseph steeled himself for what lay ahead. The future of two worlds rested on what would happen in the next few hours. Hours. With a deep breath, Joseph stepped out into the chaos-filled streets of the Adoshan capital. The city was a battleground. Explosions lit up the sky as the human fleet engaged Kroll's forces in orbit. On the ground, protesters clashed with military units, their shouts and the sound of energy weapons filling the air. Joseph and his small team of coalition members moved swiftly through the shadows, Captain Lyra taking point. As they approached the palace, the resistance stiffened. A group of Adoshan guards, their scales gleaming in the flashing lights of the battle, blocked their path. "Halt!" one of them shouted, raising his weapon. Joseph stepped forward, hands raised. "We're here to see Queen Maya. It's urgent." The guard's eyes narrowed. "By order of General Kroll, no one enters the palace." "Listen," Joseph said, his voice calm but firm. "Your queen is in labor. The child she carries could be the key to peace between our species. Are you willing to risk that future on the orders of a general who's attempting a coup?" The guards exchanged uncertain glances. Joseph pressed his advantage. "I'm not asking you to join us. Just look the other way, for the sake of Eidos." After a tense moment, the lead guard lowered his weapon. "Go, quickly." As they rushed past, Captain Lyra nodded approvingly at Joseph. "Not bad, Ambassador." They entered the palace through a side entrance, but their progress was soon halted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Lyra pushed Joseph behind a pillar, just as a squad of Kroll's loyal guards rounded the corner. "We've got this," Lyra whispered, gesturing to her coalition allies. With swift, precise movements, they engaged the guards. Energy bolts sizzled through the air as Lyra darted between columns, her combat training evident in every move. Within moments, the guards lay unconscious. "Impressive," Joseph breathed. Lyra allowed herself a small smile. "Stay close. We're not out of this yet." As they moved deeper into the palace, the sounds of conflict grew louder. They turned a corner and found themselves in the midst of a firefight between palace security and what appeared to be human special forces. "Admiral Reeves," Joseph realized. "She must have sent them to help us." Taking advantage of the chaos, they slipped past the battle and continued towards the royal chambers. The corridors were a maze, but Lyra seemed to know where she was going. Suddenly, a booming voice echoed through the hallway. "Stop right there!" General Kroll stood before them, his scales dark with rage, a high-powered energy weapon aimed at Joseph's chest. "You've caused enough trouble, human," Kroll snarled. Joseph's mind raced, searching for the right words to defuse the situation. But before he could speak, a cry of pain echoed through the palace. Queen Maya's voice. Kroll's eyes widened, his weapon wavering for just a moment. It was all Lyra needed. In a blur of motion, she disarmed the general, sending his weapon clattering to the floor. "It's over, Kroll," she said, her own weapon trained on him. With the general subdued, Joseph sprinted towards the source of the cry. He burst into the royal chambers to find a scene of controlled chaos. Queen Maya lay on a bed, her scales shimmering with exertion. Dr. Zara stood beside her, focused intently on the task at hand. The room was filled with medical equipment, hastily set up to deal with this unprecedented birth. "Joseph!" Maya gasped, reaching out a hand. He rushed to her side, taking her hand in his. "I'm here," he said softly. Dr. Zara looked up, her expression a mix of concern and drive. "The hybrid nature of the child is complicating the birth. I need to perform an emergency procedure." Joseph nodded, squeezing Maya's hand. "Do what you have to do, doctor." As Zara worked, Joseph spoke softly to Maya, words of encouragement and support flowing naturally despite the surreal circumstances. Outside, the sounds of battle seemed to fade away, the whole world narrowing to this room, this moment. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was likely only minutes, a new sound filled the air, the cry of a newborn. Dr. Zara held up the child, a female with both human and Edosian features. "She's healthy," the doctor announced, her voice filled with wonder. "And preliminary scans show the presence of the genetic markers we were hoping for. This child could indeed hold the cure for the Edosian genetic disorder." As Joseph and Maya gazed at their daughter, a wave of emotion washed over them. Joy, fear, wonder, and a deep, unshakable connection. The moment was interrupted by Captain Lyra, who entered the room with an urgent expression. "Ambassador, Your Majesty, we have a situation developing outside." Joseph reluctantly tore his gaze away from his newborn daughter. "What's happening?" "Lord Zan has mobilized his supporters. They've surrounded the palace, forming a barrier between us and Kroll's remaining forces. And Admiral Reeves is requesting an immediate conference call with Earth's government and the loyal Edosian officials." Joseph looked back at Maya and their child, then nodded resolutely. "It's time to build a new future. For all of us." As he prepared to face the challenges ahead, Joseph knew that the birth of his daughter was just the beginning. The real work of bringing their two species together was about to begin. The real work of bringing their two species together was about to unfold in ways neither Joseph nor Maya could have anticipated. As Joseph prepared to step out and address the gathered crowd, a piercing wail erupted from the newborn. The sound, a blend of human and Edosian tones, seemed to cut through the chaos outside. Joseph and Maya exchanged a look of concern. "I'll stay with her," Maya said, her voice weak but determined. "Go. They need to hear from you." Joseph nodded, squeezing Maya's hand one last time before following Captain Lyra out of the room. As they moved through the palace corridors, Joseph's mind raced with the implications of what had just occurred. A hybrid child, born of human and Edosian parents, now lay in the royal chambers. The potential ramifications were staggering. They emerged onto a balcony overlooking the palace grounds. Below, a sea of faces, both human and Edosian, looked up expectantly. Joseph could see the hope and fear etched on their features. "People of Edosia," Joseph began, his voice amplified by the palace's communication system. "Today marks a new chapter in the history of our two species. A child has been born, a child of both human and Edosian heritage." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Joseph continued, "This child represents the potential for unity and understanding between our peoples. But more than that, preliminary medical scans suggest that this child's unique genetic makeup may hold the key to curing a long-standing Edosian genetic disorder." The murmur grew louder, a mix of excitement and disbelief. Joseph raised his hands, calling for calm. "I know this news will be met with a range of emotions. There are those who will see this as a threat to Edosian purity, and those who will view it as a miraculous opportunity. I ask all of you to consider the possibilities that lie before us." As Joseph spoke, activity inside the palace intensified. Dr. Zara, still reeling from the implications of her initial findings, worked feverishly in a makeshift lab. Her hands flew over holographic displays, analyzing and reanalyzing the hybrid child's genetic structure. "This is incredible," she muttered to herself, her eyes wide with wonder. The child's DNA was a perfect fusion of human and Edosian genes, creating entirely new protein structures. One, in particular, seemed to directly target the faulty gene responsible for the Edosian disorder. In another part of the palace, Admiral Reeves was engaged in a tense video conference with Earth's government and loyal Edosian officials. "The situation on Edosia is volatile," Reeves reported, "but this birth presents an unprecedented opportunity for cooperation between our species." The human Secretary of State nodded gravely. "We agree, Admiral, but we must proceed with caution. The wrong move could plunge Edosia into civil war." As the diplomats debated, Lord Zan was making his move. He strode through the streets, his voice booming over the commotion. "Fellow Edosians, the birth of this child is a sign. It is time to embrace change, to welcome our human brothers and sisters as true partners in shaping Edosia's future." His words found fertile ground among the younger Adocians, who cheered and took up the cry. But not everyone was receptive. Pockets of resistance formed, with some older Adocians shouting for the preservation of their traditional way of life. Back in the palace, Joseph concluded his address. As he turned to re-enter the building, Captain Lyra grabbed his arm. "Ambassador, we have a problem," she said, her voice low and urgent. "General Kroll has escaped custody. He's rallying his loyalists at a military base outside the city." Joseph's heart sank. He had hoped that Kroll's capture would bring an end to the immediate threat, but it seemed the general had other plans. "We need to secure the palace," Joseph said. "And the child. If Kroll gets his hands on her—" He didn't need to finish the thought. The implications were clear to both of them. As they hurried back inside, the first reports of Kroll's pure Adosian movement began to circulate. The general's fiery rhetoric, calling for the expulsion of all humans and the purification of the royal bloodline, spread rapidly through communication networks. Joseph returned to the royal chambers to find Maya cradling their daughter, her expression a mix of love and worry. "What's happening out there?" she asked. Joseph took a deep breath. "It's complicated, but we have a chance to make real change, to bring our peoples together. It won't be easy, but I believe it's possible." Maya nodded, her gaze returning to the child in her arms. "What should we name her?" she asked softly. Before Joseph could respond, Dr. Zara burst into the room, her scales flushed with excitement. "Your Majesty, Ambassador," she said breathlessly, "I've confirmed my initial findings. Your daughter's blood contains compounds that could cure the Adocian genetic disorder. But there's more. Her cognitive development is accelerated beyond anything we've seen in human or Adocian children." The implications of this news hung heavy in the air. Their daughter, barely hours old, already carried the weight of two worlds on her tiny shoulders. As Joseph and Maya tried to process this information, an aide rushed in. "Ambassador, Your Majesty," the aide said, bowing quickly. "Admiral Reeves requests your presence immediately. She says it's urgent." Joseph and Maya exchanged a look. Whatever came next would shape the future of both their species. With one last glance at their daughter, they prepared to face the challenges ahead, knowing that the real work of uniting their peoples was only just beginning. The challenges ahead seemed insurmountable, but Joseph knew they had no choice but to face them head-on. As they prepared to leave the palace, Dr. Zara approached with a concerned expression. "Your Majesty, Ambassador, I must advise against moving the child so soon after birth. The unique nature of her physiology requires careful monitoring." Joseph and Maya exchanged glances, torn between the need for caution and the urgency of the situation. After a moment's hesitation, Maya spoke. "We understand the risks, Doctor, but we can't stay here. The palace is no longer safe, and our daughter needs to be seen by the people." With a reluctant nod, Dr. Zara began preparing a portable medical kit. "I'll accompany you to monitor her vitals." As they made their way to the spaceport, Joseph couldn't help but marvel at the resilience of his wife and newborn daughter. Maya, still weak from the difficult birth, held their child close, her scales shimmering with a mix of exhaustion and commitment. The journey to the largest city outside the capital was tense, with the ship's security systems on high alert for any potential threats. As they approached the spaceport, Joseph's comm link buzzed with an incoming message from Admiral Reeves. "Ambassador, we've detected unusual activity in the city. Be on your guard." Joseph's heart raced as he relayed the warning to Captain Lyra, who immediately tightened security protocols. As the ship touched down, the tension in the air was palpable. The moment the ship's doors opened, a wave of sound hit them, a cacophony of cheers and jeers from the gathered crowd. Joseph took a deep breath, squeezing Maya's hand reassuringly before they stepped out into view. The reaction was immediate and intense. Some Adocians reached out, their faces filled with wonder and hope at the sight of the hybrid princess. Others recoiled, their expressions twisted with disgust and fear. As they began their procession through the city streets, Joseph remained hyper-aware of their surroundings. He noticed the mix of human and Adosian security forces flanking them, a visual representation of the cooperation they hoped to foster. Halfway through their route, chaos erupted. The sound of explosions ripped through the air, sending the crowd into a panic. In the confusion, Joseph felt Maya's hand torn from his grasp. "Maya!" he shouted, his voice lost in the din of screams and running feet. Through the smoke and debris, Joseph caught a glimpse of Maya's scales as she ducked into a side alley, clutching their daughter tightly to her chest. He moved to follow but was cut off by a surge of fleeing civilians. Acting on instinct, Joseph dove into a nearby building, narrowly avoiding a volley of energy blasts that scorched the pavement where he had stood moments before. His heart pounded as he pressed himself against the wall, straining to hear any sign of Maya or their child. Outside, the sounds of struggle continued. Joseph peered cautiously around the corner, witnessing a scene of utter chaos. In the midst of it all, he spotted Maya, her royal guard overwhelmed, facing off against a menacing figure he assumed to be one of Kroll's assassins. To his amazement, Maya moved with unexpected grace and power. Despite her recent ordeal, she managed to sidestep her attackers' lunges while keeping their daughter safely cradled in one arm. With a swift, precise movement, she used her tail to sweep the assassin's legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the ground. The crowd, momentarily stunned by the display, erupted in cheers. Joseph saw humans and Adotians alike moving to form a protective circle around Maya and the princess, their differences forgotten in the face of a common threat. As security forces began to regain control of the situation, Joseph emerged from his hiding place, rushing to reunite with his family. The relief he felt upon reaching them was overwhelming, and he pulled Maya and their daughter into a tight embrace, heedless of the cameras capturing the moment. Their reunion was short-lived, however, as a new threat emerged. A group of Adocian purists, their scales darkened with rage, pushed through the crowd toward them. Their intent was clear. They saw the hybrid princess as an abomination that needed to be eliminated. But before they could reach the royal family, something unexpected happened. The protective circle of humans and moderate Adocians tightened, creating an impenetrable barrier between the purists and their targets. Joseph watched in awe as species boundaries dissolved, replaced by a shared drive to protect the innocent. The image of diverse beings standing united against hatred was powerful, and he knew it would resonate across the planet. As the last of the purists were subdued, Joseph turned to Maya. Their eyes met, and in that moment, all the fear and tension of the day seemed to melt away. Without a word, they leaned in, sharing a passionate kiss that spoke volumes about their love and commitment. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some cheered, while others looked away in discomfort. But there was no denying the raw emotion of the moment, and Joseph could almost feel public opinion shifting around them. As they broke apart, Joseph's comm link buzzed again. It was Admiral Reeves, her voice filled with a mix of concern and dedication. "Ambassador, I'm sending down our medical ships. We're going to offer aid to all injured Adocians, regardless of their stance on our presence here." Joseph nodded, knowing this gesture could go a long way in improving human-Adocian relations. As he watched the sleek medical vessels descend from orbit, he couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope for the future. But even as that hope grew, he knew their challenges were just the beginning. General Kroll was still out there, no doubt planning his next move, and the complex political landscape of Adocia was shifting rapidly, with Lord Zan's call for an emergency session of the governing body. As night fell on the tumultuous day, Joseph held Maya and their daughter close, knowing that their journey was only just beginning. The fate of two species hung in the balance, and the actions they took in the coming days would shape the future of both human and Adocian civilizations. With a mixture of grit and trepidation, Joseph prepared himself for what lay ahead. The road would be difficult, but as he looked at his family, he knew it was a path worth taking. But as he looked at his family, he knew it was a path worth every step. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Joseph and Maya's tour continued, their young daughter growing and developing at an astonishing rate. Princess Lyra, as they had named her, seemed to absorb knowledge from her surroundings like a sponge, her unique physiology allowing her to speak and understand complex concepts far beyond her tender age. As they traveled across Adocia, showcasing the benefits of human-Adocian cooperation, Joseph couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing beneath the surface. His instincts proved correct when Admiral Reeves contacted him with urgent news. "Ambassador, we've lost contact with several key government buildings in the capital," Reeves reported, her voice tense. "General Kroll has made his move." Joseph's heart sank as he processed the information. "How bad is it?" "He's taken control of the main communication hub and several other strategic locations. We're looking at a full-scale assault on the capital." As Joseph relayed the news to Maya, he could see the purpose in her eyes. "We need to act fast," she said, cradling Lyra close to her chest. Joseph nodded, his mind racing. "I have an idea," he said, turning back to the comm link. "Admiral, can you get us to the planet's central broadcasting station?" Reeves paused for a moment. "It won't be easy, but we can try. What's your plan?" Joseph glanced at Lyra, who was watching him with an unnervingly intelligent gaze. "We're going to use our secret weapon." The journey to the broadcasting station was fraught with danger. Kroll's forces had spread quickly, engaging loyal Adosian troops in fierce firefights across the city. As their transport weaved through the chaos, Joseph found himself face to face with a group of wavering soldiers. "Your loyalty should be to Adosia, not to a madman like Kroll," Joseph argued, his diplomatic skills put to the ultimate test. "Join us. Help us bring peace to your world." For a tense moment, the soldiers' weapons remained trained on Joseph and his family. Then slowly they lowered their guns. "We're with you, Ambassador," their leader said, swelling their protective detail. As they approached the broadcasting station, Joseph's comm link crackled to life. It was Dr. Zara, her voice breathless with excitement and fear. "Ambassador, we've done it. We've synthesized a cure for the Adosian genetic disorder using Princess Lyra's blood." Joseph's elation was short-lived as he heard the sound of weapons fire in the background. "Dr. Zara, what's happening?" "Kroll's forces have breached the facility," she replied, her voice strained. "We're evacuating with the cure now. Don't worry about us, just get to that broadcasting station." As they arrived at their destination, Joseph's heart raced. He knew what they were about to attempt could change the course of Adosian history forever. Maya squeezed his hand, her scales shimmering with a mix of fear and dedication. They had barely made it inside when a familiar voice rang out. "Stop right there." General Kroll stood before them, his scales dark with rage, a weapon trained on young Lyra. "I will not allow this abomination to destroy everything we've built," he snarled. Time seemed to slow as Kroll's finger tightened on the trigger. Joseph moved to shield his daughter, but before he could act, something extraordinary happened. A shimmering field of energy appeared around Lyra, deflecting Kroll's shot harmlessly away. The general's eyes widened in shock, his weapon clattering to the floor. Lyra's eyes glowed with an otherworldly light as she spoke, her voice carrying a wisdom far beyond her years. "There has been enough violence, General. It's time for peace." Seizing the moment of stunned inaction, Joseph and Maya rushed to the main control panel. With trembling hands, they initiated a planet-wide broadcast. "People of Adosia," Joseph began, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We stand at a crossroads. The path of hatred and fear leads only to destruction. But there is another way." Maya stepped forward, her scales gleaming under the studio lights. "We have seen the power of unity, the strength that comes from embracing our differences rather than fearing them. Our daughter is living proof of what we can achieve together." As if on cue, Lyra floated forward, her force field still shimmering around her. She addressed the camera, speaking first in perfect Adosian, then in flawless English. "I am both human and Adosian, and I am neither. I am something new, born of love and hope. Let me be a bridge between our peoples, a symbol of the future we can build together." As Lyra's words echoed across Adosia, Joseph could almost feel the tide of public opinion shifting. Reports began flooding in of Adosians and humans, taking to the streets together, overwhelming Kroll's forces with sheer numbers and shared purpose. In the broadcasting studio, Kroll slumped to his knees, the fight gone out of him. Joseph approached cautiously, extending a hand. "It's over, General. But there's still a place for you in this new world we're building, if you're willing to embrace change." As Kroll looked up at Joseph, his expression unreadable, the first rays of Adosia's sun began to peek through the windows, heralding the dawn of a new era for both their peoples.
If you finish this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.